I'm joined now by the former Deputy Governor at the Bank of England, Charlie Bean. Morning.
Good morning.
How significant a signal do you think these last 2 months of no growth are?
Well, it's always dangerous to read too much into 1 month or a couple of months' figures. I think it's fairly clear that the economy has been stagnating round the back end of this year. The question is that just a short-term response to all the doom and gloom that was running into the budget, or is it a harbinger of pretty stagnant growth going through next year? And the jury's out on that one. The budget itself actually adds quite a bit to demand going forward because of the planned increases in investment and in public current spending as well. But against that, particularly the increase in national insurance contributions has probably hit businesses, particularly businesses paying employing relatively unskilled labour, because the bit of the national insurance increase that's, I think, particularly significant is the reduction in the threshold at which employers
have to
start, so that you're bringing quite a lot of low-paid labour into the net. And businesses can't respond by cutting those workers' wages because they're already near the national living wage floor. And what you'll see in response, therefore, is businesses either trying to push it through in prices or cutting their employment and potentially also cutting some of their investment, just not operating at such a scale.
So if they cut investment, they won't even be able to replace those workers with robots?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there may be some businesses that say, well, let's replace them with, as you say, robots. But for some businesses, they'll just decide, I can't operate at the scale I wanted to. So essentially, the economy has taken a hit to the supply side from the budget, as well as some stimulus to demand.
We're also seeing the borrowing costs, technically speaking, the 10, in fact, 30-year yields on lending to government going up, inflation's heading upwards. Could the government do anything to stop that trend? Because that's going to mean that it's spending more on borrowing money.
Indeed. It does take time for higher long-term interest rates to feed through into debt interest. But over time, it will be adding to the government's costs. At the end of the day, what they need to do is preserve markets' confidence in their following sustainable fiscal plans. Clearly, one of the things they were very worried about going into the last budget was a repeat of the Liz Truss Kwasi Kwarteng episode, and we're bending over backwards to avoid a replay of that. And it's fair to say that some of the rise in long-term rates that we've seen is not really connected with just the UK. It's also what's happening in global markets, and particularly in the US, where there's just generally upward pressure on long-term government bond rates because market participants basically see looser fiscal policies in many countries around the world, including particularly the US.
Do you think the mood music that we've heard from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor is part of this picture? Because you talk to people in business and they say that the fall in confidence that's measured by various regular surveys is partly to do with the messages coming out of the Treasury and out of Number 10.
I think there's some truth in that. I mean, the government was between a bit of a rock and a hard place here, in that obviously it wanted to put as much of the blame as it could on the previous administration. And that resulted in the doom and gloom running into the budget. And that narrative still persists to some degree. As I said earlier, I think that was compounded by choosing to levy the extra taxes necessary to pay for higher current spending by putting it onto business. It would have been better if it had been put directly onto households in terms of higher income tax. But of course, that would have run against their promises during their campaign. So there's this tension between what would be economically a better way forward and what the politics dictates.
Well, the upshot of all of this, of course, is what's it going to do to growth? Now, who knows? As you said, it's hard to tell. But let's have a look at what the forecasters are saying. The OBR, which is what the government takes its cue from.
Indeed, where I used to, after I left the bank, I served at the OBR.
Indeed, you were there. You were the guru for this.
I was the guru. Yes.
And the Chancellor would say, I'm following the OBR, 2% growth. Problem is, right now, it looks like nobody else believes that we're going to hit 2%. And is that going to be...
I think if the OBR were to conduct new forecasts now, they would be downgrading that growth forecast. Simply because they have information about growth at the back end of this year, which they didn't previously had. So it is reasonable to expect them to project lower growth for 2025, more in line with the sort of numbers that you're showing here.
Of course, one potential consequence of that is that she's going to have to come back and find ways of raising more money, which could mean tax rises.
Not necessarily, because the key thing about the fiscal rules that she set herself is that they apply for 5 years down the road. So the question is, does the lower growth now imply lower, what in the jargon is called potential output, the normal level of operation, once the short-term frictions have worked their way out? Would the OBR mark down their estimate of the long-run supply capacity of the UK as a result of what we've seen? I suspect they wouldn't. So the fact that we've had a low growth in the near term would actually then be reflected by somewhat faster growth further out.
Oh, I see. So the whole... It's possible.
It's possible, but you shouldn't immediately assume that low growth now implies a worse outlook for her.
It's all pretty risky. And the government ministers, when they come in here, they say, Trevor, hang on. Yes, there might be low growth next year, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to change the curve by decisions. And our big decision is going to be planning reform. How much store do you set by this idea that Angela Rayner's planning reform is what's going to kickstart the growth and change the curve so there's more growth later on in this 4-year period?
Well, it's certainly possible that government actions may raise the underlying growth rate. At the moment, the OBR haven't given them any credit for that because those policies haven't been implemented. The thing that's always difficult for the OBR to judge is how much effect those sorts of policy actions will have, because the proof of the pudding is in the eating with these things.
That's very simple reference.
Indeed. So it's not unreasonable for the government to say, well, look, we are planning to loosen up planning, and that will have benefits. And indeed, it may well do, and I welcome it. I think they're exactly the right policies, and more generally looking for other areas to deregulate, to reduce burdens on business will be helpful to growth going forward. I think the problem that the government may face, though, is that the benefits of that, because it shows up in higher investments, they come quite a long way down the road.
So, hold our breath.
Yes, I think so.
Charlie Bean, thank you so much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.